In Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, there are a number of things that were changed from the books, such as the nature of adaptations and especially the adaptation of something as complex as the Lord of the Rings. Jackson famously removed the Scouring of the Shire, omitted the Tom Bombadil chapters, and changed the ultimate fate of entire character arcs, such as that of Saruman, or even changed their personalities, as was arguably done with Aragorn, perhaps to make him more likable to a more modern audience. Not to mention the amount of other content that was outright removed, which then sometimes caused even more changes to justify their absence, which I get, considering that even despite of that, the runtime still surpassed 12 hours. I could go on, but you get the point. Some of these changes, such as Arwen rescuing Frodo instead of Glorfindel, are more neutral or positive, as they do not negatively impact the themes and nature of the source material. Instead, we got more screen time with an important character that made us perhaps more interested in her story by meeting her earlier on. Some other changes, however, did negatively represent the themes and nature of the source material. One of them, in my opinion, was the Ents being presented as deciding not to go to war, whereas the opposite was what in fact happened in the book. Nonetheless, the change I want to focus on for this video is the one that occurred in The Return of the King during the siege of Minas Tirith, in that famous scene in which the Witch King confronts Gandalf the White and Pippin, and then, to the absolute shock and perhaps even horror of everyone in the theater, the Witch King is able to destroy the staff of Gandalf the White and scare Shadowfax off before almost striking and maybe even killing the wizard, with Gandalf only being saved by the Rohirrim horn that happened to sound in that exact second, which caused the Witch King to abandon this winning battle a moment before victory in order to instead focus on the riders of Theoden. While that description by itself may tell you enough to see why this scene was not the trilogy's best, allow me to describe what actually happened in the books and explain Tolkien's vision for the two characters. The battle for Gondor, for the salvation of the world, was well underway. The forces of Mordor had unleashed themselves upon the White City, and in the midst of the death and the screams and the destruction, as well as the advance of the mighty Grond, a dark rider appeared in the distance. He approached, and his every step forward was matched with the mighty thunder of Grond's attack upon the gates of the great city. The Black Captain's voice sounded, and it appeared perhaps worse than the horror of the great battering ram that, at last, was able to break down the gates of Minas Tirith. Gates that had never before fallen in the history of men. In rode the Lord of the Nazgul. A great black shape against the fires beyond he loomed up, grown to a vast menace of despair. In rode the Lord of the Nazgul, under the archway that no enemy ever yet had passed, and all fled before his face. All save one. There waiting, silent and still in the space before the gate, sat Gandalf upon Shadowfax. Shadowfax who, alone among the free horses of the earth, endured the terror, unmoving, steadfast as a graven image in Randinen. "You cannot enter here," said Gandalf, and the huge shadow halted. "Go back to the abyss prepared for you. Go back. Fall into the nothingness that awaits you and your master. Go." The Black Rider flung back his hood, and behold, he had a kingly crown, and yet upon no head visible was it set. The red fire shone between it, and the mantle's shoulders vast and dark. From a mouth unseen there came a deadly laughter. "Old fool," he said, "old fool, this is my hour. Do you not know death when you see it? Die now and curse in vain." And with that, he lifted high his sword, and flames ran down the blade. Gandalf did not move, and in that very moment, away behind in some courtyard of the city, a cock crowed. Shrill and clear he crowed, recking nothing of wizardry or war, welcoming only the morning that in the sky far above the shadows of death was coming with the dawn. And, as if in answer, there came from far away another note. Horns, horns, horns. In dark Mindolluin sides they dimly echoed, great horns of the north wildly blowing. Rohan had come at last. With these 288 words, Tolkien manages to capture the essence of not only his hero and villain, but also the true stakes of the battle. As you may have noticed, Peter Jackson retained some surface level elements of the book interaction, but sacrificed things infinitely more important. Yes, the Witch King said the line, "Do you not know death when you see it?" And yes, his sword was filled with flames once he lifted it in the sky, but that was it. The premise of the Black Captain walking under a gate that had never before fallen was lost the second you had him fly into that random open space. The premise of Gandalf alone atop mighty Shadowfax being the only ones not fleeing the terrifying sight was also lost without anyone else there to flee from the Witch King, and especially with having Shadowfax flinch at the Fell Beast. And, above all, the premise of having the renewed Angel of God himself, Gandalf, fall down to his knees, defeated at the hands of a mere mortal, immortal wannabe. The point of the scene within the book is that Gandalf, following his sacrifice with Durin's Bane, proved himself and was returned by God with a renewed strength and purpose. Gandalf the White is nearly at the peak of his angelic power during the events of this scene, and has proven himself as an agent of literal God, Eru Ilúvatar. This was shown within the movies also, and so to have him so easily defeated at the hands of the Witch King, his staff and the symbol of his strength broken, and mighty Shadowfax humbled is illogical. And to add to it, to have them saved by the coincidence of the Rohirrim arrival just because it happened to be in the books is even worse. Because in the books, the entire incident of the rooster crowing is meant to symbolize two things. The first is that while war, death and destruction has completely overtaken the minds of men, nature and life still exist and will continue to do so regardless. And the second is that despite of that, God still cares, and he shows to his servant through nature that help is indeed coming. And indeed, soon thereafter, the crowing is replaced by the horns of Rohan, which then forces the up to that point arrogant Witch King to deal with the larger threat to his forces. After all, this is what it's all about. The pride and arrogance of the forces of evil is a recurring theme that is, again and again, combated by the forces of good and of humility. I think that the scene of the books was infinitely more impactful, spiritual, as well as suspenseful. The latter part is especially important since I also think that the scene was changed in the movies precisely because the filmmakers wanted more suspense. Therefore, they had our beloved Gandalf, the good guy, defeated, which they assumed would have risen the stakes. The problem is that even if the stakes were risen, which they were not, as no one assumed Gandalf would die, the scene only lasted 68 seconds, and so the feeling of suspense soon vanished anyway, merely leaving the audience confused. Nonetheless, I do try to understand when changes are made, which is why my main issues usually regard things that could have easily not been changed, such as this seemingly minor but ultimately impactful scene. Due to my age, I'm 21, these movies are what got me into The Lord of the Rings in the first place, and despite their faults, they will always remain a masterpiece to me. But I hope you can now see why this particular scene should have never happened. A massive thank you to my channel members, and thank you very much for watching.